The 28th of this month, I'll be 77 years old. And all of you know, all of us know, that at the age 77, the sand in the hourglass of time is swiftly running out. I would hate very much to be suspended on a little thing and I leave here not a member of the bar. When I get to heaven, I want to be a member of the Florida bar.
As a young child, Virgil Darnell Hawkins had one dream: to become a lawyer. A preacher's son from the rural hamlet of Oklahoma, Florida, Virgil Hawkins spent 10 years trying to break down the color barrier at the University of Florida. He opened the doors of education for all African Americans.
Hawkins' journey into the legal profession began when he was a young child. He saw many of the members of his father's congregation arrested, often on minor charges, with no idea of what they were doing in court because they had no attorney, often not even understanding what guilt and innocent meant. And he believed that the best way to help these people would be for him to become an attorney.
He would talk about, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a lawyer, until my daddy would call him my little lawyer. That's before he even began school.
Well, I never really understood why it was his dream, but I knew Virgil had this inner urge to be helpful for the downtrodden, the needy, the poor.
He always said that he wanted to be a lawyer and one day he would be a lawyer. And he constantly made that kind of statement.
Virgil Hawkins was born on November 28, 1906, in Oklahoma, Florida, the fifth of 8 children born to Reverend Virgil and Josephine Hawkins. Like any other colored Central Florida community, Oklahoma held few prospects for young black children.
Well, my mother was a very, very good mother to 8 head of children. And she took good care of us, and just like I told you, she worked, washed and ironed, trying to take care of her children, because she had to do something to help my father. Because this work my father was doing, you know, they didn't pay anything much because we lived out of it.
Of the 8 Hawkins children, Virgil was the only one who expressed a desire to attend high school, and his parents were determined to help him reach his goal.
He had a little store that sat right across the street over there. And that's how he and my mother would partly live out of that little store. Besides, my father had to do a lot of hard work to make a living. They would do such thing as clearing land for other watermelon growers to grow. They would clear land, cut down little blackjacks, which was called oak trees now. They would grow as oak trees. My father worked real hard to put Virgil through school.
Over the next 20 years after he graduated high school, he married his wife, Ida, who was to share his life for the next 56 years. He worked as an insurance salesman, a teacher, a principal, and eventually as the public relations director for Bethune-Cookman College, a black college located in Daytona Beach, Florida.
In 1949, Hawkins was teaching on the campus of Bethune-Cookman College. He was a faculty member, part of the public relations department. Many of the students and faculty at that time, shortly after World War II, felt that they had fought in the war to bring the promise of America's Constitution to the world, and that now it was time to bring that promise back home.
Well, it was a very small setting, and I guess we had maybe 65 or 70 people on the faculty and staff, and everybody knew each other, and that we formed a close-knit organization.
Virgil was a wonderful, warm, sensitive, caring individual. He never hated anybody, even those people who tried to destroy him. He loved everybody. It's just hard to let you see. He was really just a teddy bear sharpened to a focus.
In all honesty, in the early ages, primarily in the black race, you were either a preacher or a teacher. I mean, those were your two notable professions, and those two positions were positions that garnered most respect in the black community, teacher or preacher.
Well, he was a strong-willed person, and I think that he had high principles and tremendous integrity, and that what he felt was right, that's what he was going to do. And I think that he knew that he had a right to go to the University of Florida Law School, and that he felt there was no need for him to drop out and not pursue it. So he pursued it based on that kind of thinking.
In April 1949, with the support and encouragement of the NAACP, Virgil Hawkins applied for admission to the University of Florida Law School. He was found to be qualified in every way, but his admission was denied solely because of his race.
They took it to the Florida Supreme Court. By that time, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in Sweat versus Painter that a separate school was not equal and that students must be admitted to the white law school in Texas. Despite that ruling, the Florida Supreme Court chose to rule in the exact opposite direction.
The argument, as I remember, to the Supreme Court was the fact that that segregation itself was discrimination and was therefore unconstitutional.
In defiance of the clear precedent based on Sweat v. Painter, previously decided by the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of Florida approved the opening of a separate law school at an established black state college, Florida A&M, for the sole purpose of excluding Virgil Hawkins' admission to the University of Florida.
Say that that law school satisfied the legal responsibility of offering education to Virgil Hawkins, and for that reason, he had no reason to complain.
Virgil Hawkins refused to attend Florida A&M.
It was my understanding that Florida A&M, the law school there, was created for the express purpose of having a law school for blacks so that they would not have to be admitted to the white law schools in Florida. This was not unusual throughout the country at that time. They created law schools. Some of the states were paying tuition to have blacks go out of the state, so to go to law school someplace else. Many of the southern states were using these diversionary tactics.
I knew the struggle I went through, having to leave my home state to go to another state. I encouraged him. I said, Virgil, I think what you're doing is great, it's noble. I said, I'm sorry that I didn't do it. I said, I'm sorry that I took the handout that they gave me and went to the University of Michigan. I said, you're doing the right thing, keep on going.
We were afraid that physical harm could come to him, and even the worst that possible that he could presumably meet his death in his pursuit. And obviously we didn't want that to happen to him, but at the same time we were proud of what he was doing. But we knew that it could have some severe consequences.
Here's a man who could have done something else. Here's a man who could have gone to another university, received his master's degree or his doctorate or his law degree, as some of the rest of us did. That was not Virgil Hawkins.
There were whites here in Daytona who constantly requested that the president would fire him because he was a troublemaker and he was trying to get into the University of Florida and whatnot.
But a lot of people in the black community laughed at Virgil. They thought it was an idea that would never happen and that he was foolish to pursue it. That's pretty much what they thought.
He, deep down within him, he knew there were many organizations that just simply despised him. He knew about the Ku Klux Klan, as everyone else knew. Virgil knew about the Ku Klux Klan. But he had come, I think, to the point in his life, had reached the point in his life where no one is going to turn me around. Nobody.
But I can faintly remember them talking about the seriousness of it, you know. And the cross that was burnt. It was one burnt in front of my grandmother's house when they were staying in, he and her were staying here. And that was next to our house, which is my mother's and auntie's sister, older sister. And there were a cross burnt in front of their house now. And I can remember them saying, well, it's going to get sticky because this was the Ku Klux Klan, you know, was threatening.
He would let me read the letters that he received, the hate mail that he received, the phone calls that he received, the letters he got with animals, particularly monkeys and baboons and gorillas pasted to them, and saying that this was Virgil, and why would we want an ape to go to school with an ape. Threatening letters Virgil would get, but these things did not deter Virgil.
He had a hard time because he was threatened. And at nights, my other brothers that's older than he, hair was blacker than his. His turned whiter than the other brothers. And they would tease him and say, oh, your hair is turning gray. He said, yes, the reason it's turning gray. Say, you all in your bed, sleeping at nights while I'm under the house, running and dodging.
Well, there was this little man that was causing, black man that was causing the state of Florida considerable grief. And those of us in the legal fields knew legally what it was about. Others just newspapers and the media and those out of the legal field perhaps did not understand the significance of Virgil's insistence. But those of us in the legal field knew that if he broke through, then it would be a different state as far as blacks were concerned.
Over the next few years, Hawkins' petition to be admitted to the University of Florida Law School was repeatedly rejected by the Florida Supreme Court.
I was amazed how he took the rebuffs in this kind of thing. It never really knocked him out, knocked him down, but it didn't knock him out. He always got back up and got back into it again, because not mainly for himself, but for what good it would mean to his posterity. His case was we had appealed it to the United States Supreme Court on the legal issue involved, not a factual issue, and it was set down for a hearing. Brown versus Board of Education was heard earlier in May, and Virgil Hawkins was set down somewhere around May 22nd or May 24th, and the decision was rendered right after the Brown case.
In the landmark case of Brown versus the Board of Education, the United States Supreme Court held that segregation in public school facilities based upon race, even if the facilities are equal, is unconstitutional.
In 1954, the Hawkins case had gotten to the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as the more famous case of Brown versus Board of Education. The U.S. Supreme Court delayed the ruling on Hawkins till after it made its Brown rule, basically thought Hawkins was so cut and dry, since they had already ruled in Sweatt, that they only needed a paragraph. And they said to the Florida Supreme Court, consider the Hawkins case in light of Brown, intending it to mean we've not only decided on professional education, we've decided on elementary education. There's no question that you have to integrate, you have to admit the student. Florida chose not to view the case in that manner.
The Florida court then took the position that there was a factual situation, a factual issue that need to be determined before they could rule and before they could give legality and implementation to the Supreme Court ruling. And as a result of referred it to Judge Murphy for the taking of testimony on factual issues, which I certainly was not of the opinion that the decision called for this additional testimony or this additional review. It was like starting all over again.
Now that the United States Supreme Court made it clear that race could not be the sole basis for discrimination in its admissions policy to a state university, the Florida Supreme Court, in an effort to exclude Virgil Hawkins, determined that admitting him to the all-white University of Florida could cause grave and serious problems affecting the welfare of the students. The Murphy Commission was set up by the court to investigate that concern.
It certainly just looked like to me that this was a delaying tactics to forestall and to postpone the admission of Virgil Hawkins to a all-white institution.
Florida Supreme Court Justice Terrell, in his concurring opinion, cited animal behavior and the need of different species to segregate. He further wrote, "When God created man, he created each race to his own continent according to color. Europe to the white man, Africa to the black man, and the America to the red man." But we are now advised that God's plan was in error and must be reversed.
I find it incredible that this court would have said what it said, even in those times. Some people I've heard would tend to justify it by saying it was a different time. But the law was not so different than it is today. And there's no way to escape the fact there was an outright defiance of the United States Supreme Court that said that you shall admit Virgil Hawkins. This court, one of the few courts that I've ever heard of in this nation, to say, we're not going to do it. We're going to find as many ways to keep him out as you can find to try to put him in.
The Hawkins case again was brought before the United States Supreme Court. This time, the court was very direct in stating, as this case involved the admission of a Negro to a graduate professional school, there is no reason for delay. He is entitled to prompt admission.
They didn't retreat from the original decision, and they said that he was entitled to admission. And we thought and felt that admission right away, and as a result of that, Virgil Hawkins went over to the University of Florida to register. And at that particular time, he was denied admission.
The Hawkins case became an important issue in the 1956 governor's race in Florida.
And the three main candidates, including incumbent Leroy Collins, the governor at that time, a former governor, and a man from Tampa known as Sumter Lowry, chose to all run against Hawkins rather than each other, trying to show that each one could do a better job of keeping Hawkins out of the law school.
In May 1956, the Murphy Commission reported to the Florida Supreme Court that desegregation at that time would cause serious public discord at state universities.
They used the fear of determining what others would do if they allowed Virgil in. They went to the point of kids would withdraw, parents would stop supporting, violence would prevail.
Part of the uproar that came out of the Brown decision, out of the direct order to admit Hawkins, was a political philosophy in Florida that a bunch of northern individuals in the federal government were trying to interfere with the lawful duties of the state, and that this was communist inspired and otherwise being created by agitators. So the legislature created a committee to investigate it. Basically was Florida's version of the McCarthy committee.
The thing that amazed me about that when I was before that committee was the fact that my whole office file was on the other side of the table, and it had not been subpoenaed, and I was just in a state of shock.
It was one in which we understood and knew that they were trying to bring pressure to bear, that they were really trying to intimidate, antagonize the persons that were involved in civil rights, that they were really keying in on Hawkins. I think they sat there with him for about 2.5 days, questioning him about his wife, her salary, questioning him about if he had ever received any money from the Florida State Teachers Association. They questioned him about if the NAACP had ever given him any money, paid him to be a plaintiff. And of course, Virgil didn't back down. He didn't bite his tongue, and I think he did. He stood firm.
In March 1957, the Florida Supreme Court for a 5th time turned down Virgil Hawkins' petition, stating that the burden was now on Hawkins to prove his admission to law school wouldn't cause great public mischief.
The Florida Supreme Court was really overruling the United States Supreme Court, even though we knew that the United States Supreme Court in many instances would not directly, order a state Supreme Court to do such things. But we were quite concerned that this was going on.
They went back to the Supreme Court for a 3rd time, U.S. Supreme Court, and at this point the court said, go through the federal trial system, let the federal court enforce your right. The state of Florida had basically said to the U.S. Supreme Court, come and arrest our highest officials, arrest the justices of the Florida Supreme Court, arrest our governor, arrest our legislature, because the legislature entered a law that said that the U.S. Supreme Court's order was null and void and would not be recognized in Florida. The closest we would have to a declaration of secession from the Union.
Federal Judge Dozier Devane, who was assigned this case, offered Hawkins an ultimatum.
At the very last moment, when the trial judge was forced to implement the order, he went to Hawkins' attorneys and said, you've got 2 options. If Hawkins remains and you want to admit him, I will allow the state of Florida to litigate his qualifications. And that would mean that the case would likely go on for 3 or 4 more years, up and down the courts, litigating whether he was qualified, whether the 1949 order was in fact accurate, saying that he was qualified, and in the process many other students would not have a chance for admission. On the other hand, the judge said, if Hawkins withdraws, I will enter a blanket order right now saying that qualified applicants can be admitted.
Virgil Hawkins selflessly agreed to withdraw his original application to the University of Florida after his 9-year court battle so that other blacks could be immediately admitted to the University of Florida.
Virgil made it possible for me to go to law school at the University of Florida, and made it possible for me to open the door for the rest of the blacks that came after me. And so I see him as kind of the father of the black legal profession in the state of Florida. He made it all possible.
By 1961, Hawkins had tried to get into the University of Florida, could not meet the new standards, went up to Boston, took a degree in public relations, and then found a law school, now called the New England School of Law, that would admit him.
I think the urge to fulfill how he thought he could help those in need, especially legally, was just burning, and he thought it was time to move on. I don't think he felt like he was giving up the fight to move into the University of Florida, because I think that was something he felt had to be done in order to deal with those that would come behind him. And at the same time, he wanted to be a lawyer some portion of his life himself. So I think the going to Boston was just a division of the past momentarily. He always felt that he would prevail, and I think that's what really triggered going to Boston.
White lawyers that started out the same time he did were in practice, in lucrative practices here, and he was still trying to get a law degree up in Boston, and then getting back down here, he faced another hurdle. They weren't going to let him become a member of the bar.
In 1964, Hawkins graduated from the New England School of Law. He had plans to come back to Florida and be an attorney representing the clients from his hometown. Unfortunately, his school had not received ABA accreditation prior to his graduation, and Florida would not allow him to sit for the bar exam on the grounds that the school he went to was not an accredited school. They did achieve accreditation later, but because his graduation was prior to that, he was never allowed to sit for the bar exam, and he basically resumed a career outside of the legal profession, with the exception of some assistance that he did working with the NAACP attorneys behind the scenes.
Virgil held a position in the Community Action Agency. I do not remember if he was the director or if he, whatever that job title was.
He had a professional role. He was dealing with housing, and there was an opportunity for counseling and guidance, and he could use his skills, and he assisted the director.
Virgil Hawkins also volunteered his legal skills to help desegregate public facilities, and was supervised by Leander Shaw, who was then an attorney in private practice.
Here's a man that had gone through everything Virgil had gone through, but when Virgil came into a room, it sort of lit up. He didn't carry all these things. They weren't heavy. They weren't. He didn't become bitter as a result of them. There was a levity about him. He didn't take himself that seriously. He was dedicated now. Don't say that he wasn't dedicated at all, and that he knew where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. But that was a lightness. He was a very pleasant person to be around, very delightful person. And if the most menial thing, if you told him that needs to be done, Virgil, it wasn't too small for Virgil to do. The fact that he was Virgil Hawkins never went to his head.
In 1977, Virgil Hawkins sought the services of an attorney to help him achieve his lifelong dream. Hawkins had discovered a Florida Supreme Court case permitting the brother of a Florida Supreme Court justice to be admitted as a lawyer without having to pass the bar examination. The court's rationale was that the justice's brother intended to go to law school before the bar examination was required to practice law in the state of Florida. Mr. Hawkins believed his application to the University of Florida at a time when there was no bar examination, and his 9 years of litigation clearly established a similar intent.
Oh, I was a redneck nigger-hating son of a bitch. We were raised that way. Well, Virgil was a very small fellow, and a little round cherub face, and he had no appointment or anything. I can remember the secretary came back and asked me if I wanted to see this black man out there, and he wouldn't tell her what it was about. Well, it so happened I didn't have anything to do that morning, so I said, sure, send him on back. And Virgil just came in my office and introduced himself and asked me how long I'd been practicing law and where did I go to school. And I told him, and I thought he was a very curious fellow. He hadn't told me what he wants yet. And then he began telling me all the stories about him wanting to go to the University of Florida. And I'd never heard of him. I felt that this was a very honest, hard-working, and man of great integrity. That he had, I've heard it said so many times, you know, by Martin Luther King, that I have a dream. Well, Virgil had a dream. He had his dream before what Martin Luther did, as far as I'm concerned. And he didn't care how many walls were put in front of him. He'd climb them or scratch at them until, you know, Virgil went to his grave. He really didn't care.
After pending for 2 years, the Florida Supreme Court granted Jim Shook's petition for waiver of the bar examination requirement for Virgil Hawkins. On February 8, 1977, Virgil Hawkins was sworn in as a member in good standing of the Florida Bar. He intended to open a law practice in his hometown of Leesburg, Florida.
The court at the time was embarrassed into admitting him, but at that time Hawkins was now 70 years of age, out of law school for over 12 years, with no training in Florida law.
At the time of his admission as a lawyer, Hawkins said, "This is the proudest day of my life. I want to start a legal services program for people barely making a living, who don't qualify for legal aid but still can't afford to hire a lawyer."
He was happy. Virgil was extremely happy that he was admitted. He mentioned the fact that it had been a long fight, a long struggle, but it was a good struggle.
And we all were so proud to know that he could start off with his law work. We were all happy about it.
It was a dinner put on by the black community here in town. It was held over at the community center. At about 250, 300 persons attending. There was 99.9% black attendance. There was one white attorney.
He was happy that he was one of us and that all of us had come to Leesburg to celebrate with him his becoming a lawyer. And that the town itself of Leesburg, where I guess the last lynching in Florida had occurred, the town had honored him, and the mayor was there declaring Virgil Hawkins Day in Leesburg.
I had a lot of empathy for him because I felt like that he was doing something that no one else had the courage to do, and Virgil had it, and so we had to, you have to admire that. There are few of those kind of men and women in the world today.
Oh, it was a major stain on the Bar Association in Lake County to have have Virgil Hawkins, maybe another black, but for some reason the white Bar Association here felt that Virgil was not wasn't deserving to be a lawyer.
As a practicing lawyer in Leesburg, Florida, Virgil Hawkins' lifelong dream was finally realized.
At the Young Black Lawyers Association, and he was just amicable man, and he was funny, and he was an excellent orator. So he made a good impression about holding on to your dreams, no matter if it takes 50 years or 60 years. And it was amazing. He still had that twinkle in his eye. It was, even though he was 71, 72, it was still all worth it. And it was just great joy, but that was the gist of his message. It took a long time, but he made it.
I got a chance to meet my hero after Virgil and I both became members of the Florida Bar, and Virgil came to a National Bar Association meeting. It was a very, very special meeting because just about everybody who had become a lawyer in one way or another, who was African American, owed a debt of gratitude to Virgil Hawkins. And then when we met him, and he was just such a personable, likable guy with no hate or vindictiveness for what had happened to him over the past like 27 years. It was absolutely amazing. He actually became like the president emeritus of the National Bar Association, having never held office.
Anytime and every time we went into the office, he was always, poor thing, he was always busy trying to get depositions or whatever you call them, or papers run off, or seeing clients behind closed doors. We would have to sit there when we went in sometimes for an hour, 2 hours, because he would have somebody there that, some poor person that he was trying to help.
And he was downtown in Leesburg, right off of Main Street, on 3rd Street, and he was the first black lawyer downtown. Durden was here. He had practiced under Attorney Durden at that time, but he was downtown.
By 1983, Hawkins had been in practice for over 5 years. He was having a lot of difficulty, but he was still trying to keep his dream of representing poor individuals.
The year started out in a positive way for Virgil Hawkins. He received the National Bar Association's Gertrude Rush Award, their highest honor, for opening the legal profession for blacks in Florida. In addition, then State Senator Carrie Meek introduced a bill in the Florida legislature to name the law library at Florida State University after Virgil Hawkins.
I thought it was an excellent idea, and it would be a fitting memorial for Virgil. So I filed a bill to name that building after Virgil Hawkins. I cannot tell you the furor that caused in the Florida legislature.
That began a campaign to once again try to discredit him, prove him unqualified. Before he was unqualified for admission, now he's going to be unqualified to have his name on a law school.
Immediately after Senator Meek's bill to honor Mr. Hawkins was introduced in the legislature, a pending grievance against him was made public, violating the rules of confidentiality. The grievance alleged that Mr. Hawkins had acted incompetently as a lawyer for what amounted to a minor error in a criminal proceeding.
They took a minor incident in a criminal matter, something that tens of thousands of public defenders new in the profession make as errors every day, and turned it into a trial of major proportions to prove Hawkins was unfit. As a compromise to that opposition, the sponsor of the bill in the Senate, Carrie Meek, agreed to a scholarship in Hawkins' name.
In November 1983, Hawkins appeared in his own defense before the Florida Supreme Court to contest the Florida Bar's recommendation that he be temporarily suspended as a lawyer.
No lawyer in the country could have pleaded Virgil's case better than Virgil did it. There was an angel up there that told Virgil what to say and what to do.
I want to just say this, and then I'll be through, that the 28th of this month, I'll be 77 years old. And all of you know, all of us know, that at the age 77, the sand in the hourglass of time is swiftly running out. I would hate very much to be suspended on a little thing and leave here not a member of the bar. When I get to heaven, I want to be a member of the Florida bar. So I said, I'm asking this, and I do this. I put all of my faith in this court.
Hawkins argued his own case with such brilliance that the court refused to follow the bar's recommendation, and he remained a lawyer.
The attempts to remove Hawkins from the legal profession did not end with the unsuccessful effort in '83. Between '83 and '85, a series of examinations of his practice resulted in procedure after procedure against him. It's almost like a situation where every time you get out to drive a car, there was a patrolman following your car, watching everything you did, ready to pull you over the first time you made 1 mile above the speed limit, the first time your car veered slightly over into the lane. And the more that he tried to watch his rearview mirror, the more it was difficult to watch the front.
You simply cannot take a man and essentially lock him out of the schoolhouse door for 30 or more years, and then one day walk up and say, okay, you're a lawyer, and then turn around and expect that he is prepared in every way to discharge his duties in such a way as to stay out of Dutch. The answer to that is what segregation does.
At a certain point, there were questions about his handling of money and a guardianship, matters that probably would have been resolved under other circumstances. But he was so afraid at that time that he panicked, misused some funds entrusted to him, and that was going to be the final measure to take him out of the profession. Rather than go back to the court and ask for another chance, Hawkins petitioned to resign.
I don't think Virgil was a dishonest man. I don't think he would intentionally steal anything from anybody.
On April 19, 1985, at the age of 78, with some grievances pending against him, Virgil Hawkins voluntarily surrendered his license to practice law. In his 8 years as a lawyer, he represented over 1,000 clients, most of whom paid him little or no fees for his services.
They finally got him. He was down, but if you really knew Virgil, Virgil was never down. But he did not feel defeated. He just felt that his long struggle, that it had finally come to an end.
You'd think he would have been downcast, but he had a feeling that he was going to get it back. I mean, he told me that he was going to try and get his ticket back.
Virgil Hawkins died February 1988.
By the time of his funeral, I pretty much had made the decision that charted the change of course in my life.
When he read the obituary, stating about Virgil's death, he was very upset. And he felt bad that he didn't help Virgil or wasn't able to help Virgil earlier.
I attended the funeral and I wrote about it. And I mentioned that there was only one white attorney there. And I pointed out that, there was nobody else from the bar.
It was clear to me, as I read the obituary, that he was going to be written out of history. not because he didn't deserve to be a part of history, but because at the tail end of his life, when he was over 70 years of age, he tried one more time to help out the fellow members of the human race. And for that, somehow we were going to say everything he did, everything he sacrificed meant nothing. And for me, it was kind of the final straw.
Within 2 months after Hawkins' death, Harley Herman petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to posthumously reinstate Virgil Hawkins as a lawyer in good standing.
He said that we might lose our practice, we might lose everything that we have. So I said, I've been working since I've been 13, and we'll just start over. It's not a problem for me.
The proudest moment of my life was when I took my oath of office to the bar. I knew that what really meant something to him was to be an attorney. And to me, the best way of saying, we knew, we understand, we know what you wanted to accomplish, is to give him back what should have been given back to him at the end of his life.
When he first told me what he wanted to do, and in the first few months or so, I said, and I told him, I said, well, you know, your practice, you're not going to have a practice. I think before this is over, you're going to be run out of town.
I just didn't feel that he would be able to pull it off, just sincerely, you know. But I thought it was worthwhile and noble of him to try.
When he was trying to get Virgil reinstated, yeah, Harley put this big sign out in front of, you know, I remember it was something about restoring Gator or Hawkins to be a Gator or something. But I know he caught a lot of ridicule about that.
On October 20, 1988, almost 40 years after Virgil Hawkins applied to law school, the Florida Supreme Court posthumously reinstated him as a member of the Florida Bar. The court acknowledged the injustices visited upon him in the past, as well as the difficulties he had to face as an attorney. The Florida Supreme Court found the words of tribute never accorded to Virgil Hawkins during his lifetime. The court stated, Hawkins' struggle for equal justice should be memorialized. Hawkins is entitled to be recognized for his contribution to our state.
I walked out of that courthouse, and for the first time, I understood why Hawkins was as happy as he was even in those final days, or at least could laugh and joke, because I realized that I had been given a unique opportunity to do more with the education I had been given, the opportunity to practice law, than I had ever expected.
Harley Herman next initiated a campaign to name the Civil Legal Clinic at the University of Florida in honor of the man whom they had previously denied admission, Virgil Hawkins.
I also knew that when we looked at what the university had done to this man, what they had cost him, it was that ability to practice law when he was young enough so that he could leave a legacy. Many attorneys establish a firm, retire, die, the firm carries on their name.
Just listen for a few minutes as I tell you many reasons why the Virgil Hawkins name should be placed in memorial in the state of Florida. At 69 years of age in 1976, the Florida Supreme Court granted the diploma privilege Hawkins would have been entitled to if he had been admitted when he applied to the University of Florida in 1949. And I don't think many of you realize the struggle that Virgil Hawkins had.
Governor Bob Martinez signed into law the bill passed by the Florida legislature, which renamed the University of Florida Legal Clinic the Virgil Darnell Hawkins Civil Legal Clinic.
All of our clients are, by definition and by law, indigent clients, people who could not otherwise pay a fee and obtain the legal services that we provide. About half of our clients are black Americans. They're certainly the same kind of people that Mr. Hawkins dedicated his professional career once he became a member of the bar to serving.
In the following year, 1990, Harley Herman initiated and coordinated an effort to build a monument in honor of Virgil Hawkins to be located near his birthplace in Oklahoma, Florida.
My wife and I had an anniversary, and I was so much into the Hawkins thing that she decided to give me a T-shirt with Hawkins' picture on it. I took one look at that. I said to her, "There's our monument. That's how we'll build it. We can sell these shirts. We can get donations using the shirts as a catalyst, and we will build a monument on these shirts."
On February 9, 1992, hundreds of people gathered outside of Virgil Hawkins' birthplace in Oklahoma for the formal dedication of his monument.
There was quite a lot of generosity on the part of many people who knew Virgil, who wanted the legacy to live, who wanted the memory of this man to live.
Well, it is significant because it says to the community that here is a giant that lived, and we respect him, we recognize him, and we hold him in high esteem.
Well, that's why I said at his dedication that I didn't know whether to thank him or curse him, because but for Virgil Hawkins, I'd probably would have became one of the money-grubbing, personal injury, worthless lawyers that I consider to be in that field today. They're very rich, very stupid, and lead very shallow lives. Virgil gave me an eye to looking at beyond just making money with a law degree.
I saw hundreds of times over within the people at the monument dedication. There was a sense of pride. There was a sense of joy. There was a sense of feeling that justice had occurred. Of the 400 people that were there, there was an outpouring of love that I had not seen since the day of Hawkins' funeral. And I realized that for the family, for the residents, for African Americans from all over the state of Florida, that finally they saw a piece of justice. And there really aren't words to describe how everybody felt.
People will remember Virgil Hawkins' works because of Harley Herman. I think Virgil may have been lost in history. He may have been lost in history if it were not for the works of Harley Herman.
Norm, his wife, I mean, she's married to two people now. Really. He is committed to the day he dies to Virgil Hawkins now.
He really cared about Virgil as a person. I don't think that it was a color issue. Harley saw Virgil as a person who injustice was done to him, and he wanted to straighten it out. And he was going to straighten it out no matter how long or how much he had to do to do this.
It is a lesson in humanity that is one that could be, should be, ought to be duplicated in much of what we do. If all of us could get along and be brothers to each other, like Harley and Virgil, this would be a much better world.
God sent the right man to do what Virgil Hawkins had to do. Somehow, throughout history, you'll find that the right man appears at the right time in history to make change. And Virgil was one of those persons.
he didn't just liberate African Americans to go to law school, he liberated black and white.
From an historical standpoint, I think young blacks ought to know that it just didn't happen, that there were people, fighters like Virgil, that made it happen. And people, the youngsters like my kids now, they think that it was always this way, that if I want to go to University of Florida, all I have to do is apply. It's a state school, and my tax dollars pay for it. And they don't realize that it just didn't happen automatically.
If you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. So that it's a fool that forgets his past in terms of trying to chart where he's going in the present. So that I think that any person who wants to be well-based and get a good foundation in life, that they ought to know about the Hawkins story, which tells them something about how hard the struggle is. But even though it's hard, that you can still be victorious in the end.
Perhaps the most important lesson to be remembered from the courageous life of Virgil Hawkins is the recognition of how prejudice exposes the ignorance of those who discriminate and robs those who are discriminated against from attaining their full potential as human beings. Virgil Hawkins never sought personal glory. Like other truly great people, he rose from the trenches in battles he never planned to fight, and sacrificed himself so that others could enjoy the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard about a regrettable and poignant portion of the jurisprudential history of our court and our state. And while it is sad, we must not wallow in the lament. Rather, we must learn from the lessons taught. One person with hope, with vision, and persistence can make a difference. Virgil Hawkins was responsible for opening many doors previously closed. He turned an entire system around. And another lesson that can be learned from this is that hatred and discrimination will not triumph in the end. The fact that this video was shown and that this ceremony was held in this very courtroom where many of Mr. Hawkins' cases were argued and rejected shows that great progress has been made. But as Mr. Hawkins did not rest in his defeats, we must not rest in the victories of the past. We must press on with renewed efforts to ensure that the prejudice on the basis of gender, race, ethnicity is eliminated not only from our profession, the profession of the law, but from all of our lives.
Integration actually started in 1949 when the NAACP sued the University of Florida after 6 black students were denied admission. One of those students, Virgil Hawkins, persisted in legal struggles for years and ultimately proved victorious. But he withdrew his application to pave the way for Mr. Stark's admission. With the new marker, we officially acknowledge and honor those students.
To understand why Mr. Hawkins is the poster child for the slogan, "His mind was a terrible thing to waste," watch the YouTube version of the PBS documentary by law professor Lawrence Dubin that's called "A Lawyer Made in Heaven." And we have a link to that on the virgilhawkins.org website. And then at his last visit to the University of Florida campus in 1985, Mr. Hawkins urged students to fight for a cause, to find a cause and fight hard for it. It remains our hope that this marker will inspire such efforts.